That's okay. People will have what we need to right now do. Oh, okay. Can I start, Paul?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Our program, Virtual Tours to Israel with Rotem, is brought to you by the Ross Family JCC of Greater Orlando and our partners, JCCs in Tampa, in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, North and South Miami Beach. We're excited to have this program by an Israeli tour guide named Rotem Shachar, who grew up in South Florida. Rotem, your turn.
Yay. Well, thank you, Avivit and the Orlando JCC and the other JCCs for having me here. Like Avivit said, I was born in Israel and my family moved to Miami when I was 2 years old. So I grew up there. For those of you in the Miami area, I grew up not far from what was once the 163rd Street Mall. Today, there's a large Walmart there, a Home Depot. I think Home Depot's still there at least. And I went to the Sinai Academy of North Dade when they still had a day school. I went to the Samuel Sheck Hillel Community Day School for seventh and eighth grade. That's right next to the JCC there. And I went to Crop for high school. I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, where I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in soil and water science before I moved here to Israel. And for those of you in Tampa, my brother lives in Tampa as well. One of my favorite spots that he showed me was Lettuce Lake. So if you haven't been there and you're in Tampa, you should definitely check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. And yeah, so I moved here to Israel. I started a PhD in hydrology, but I didn't really like that so much. So I stopped. And then after doing some soul searching and living with my grandpa for a while, I decided to become a tour guide. So that brings me here today. So I'm really excited to be here with you all. And we're going to tour the old city of Jaffa today. So, a little bit about the old city to get us all on the same page before we actually start our tour. So, the old city of Jaffa is at least 4,000 years old, if not older. It's about the same age as Jerusalem. And that's a lot of history to cover in a little under an hour. So luckily we don't have to cover all of it. We're only going to talk about what we'll be seeing. And so we will be seeing things that are almost 4,000 years old, but mostly we'll be dealing with the time periods of the Ottoman Empire, which was from 1517 until 1917, the British Mandate from 1917 until 1948, and in the modern day state of Israel from 1948 until this very moment. So without further ado, we will start our tour. And our first stop here in the old city of Jaffa stop would be the clock tower. Come on, clock tower. There it is. Okay, so this would be the Jaffa Clock Tower. And this clock tower is an amazing meeting point. It's an iconic landmark here in Jaffa. And anyone who's been in the Jaffa, Tel Aviv area for more than a few days will be able to point you in the direction. And it's a great area as well. The Jaffa Flea Market is here, the old city, the beach, quite a lot of things you can do. And the clock tower itself was built by the Sultan Abdul Hamid II. He was he was the sultan during this time, and he was celebrating his 25th year in power and wanted to celebrate and show off the technological advancement and modernity of the empire. So he builds clock towers, and he built hundreds of them throughout the entire empire, six of which are located here in Israel. Not all of them are still standing, but the Jaffa Clock Tower would be the most famous of them. And that's one of the reasons it's such an iconic landmark. Now, we said that the area of the clock tower is also interesting. And so here on our left, we're going to be seeing
In a moment.
what was once
Let
an
me.
important building here. There it is. Am I pausing? I should be speaking. Okay, so so this was the new Saraya building, the new City Hall building that was built during the time of the Ottomans, and it was built here instead of the old City Hall building, which was inside the old city, and we'll see it in just a few minutes. It was built because in the late 1800s, there's a move to live outside of the old city. And so many people are moving out of the old city that City Hall is disconnected from its residents, and they decide to build a new building right outside the old city. So this would be it. And the building itself is destroyed during the Independence War. So on the right-hand side of the clock tower, we can see a lovely boutique hotel known as the Setai. But its claim to fame, at least in my books, is not that it's a fancy boutique hotel today, but because it was the police station and jail during the time of the Ottomans when it was built. The British also used it as a police station and jail, and we also use it as a police station until we built a new police station not too far from here. So about 10, 15 years ago, the building stopped functioning as a police station and the restoration and renovation work began. Now, the neat part is that when it was a jail, there was an inner courtyard where there were public hangings, and the hotel has preserved the inner courtyard, though there are no gallows in it or anything, which was a little disappointing. But that would have been a neat sort of concept to have a hotel with ghost stories during the evenings. So we are going to teleport today. That's the beauty of virtual tours. You don't actually have to walk, we can teleport. So we have teleported to the old Saraya, the old City Hall building. This is the building that the columns out next to the clock tower replaced. And this is a huge building, which today serves quite a lot of different functions. And the first one I want to show you is the Jaffa Museum, which we can see on the corner. And it is a relatively small museum considering the size of the building itself, but they have all sorts of alternating exhibits. So the exhibits change out every few months. And when it's open, there's a sign outside telling you exactly what exhibit's going on. Next door, we've got the Arab Hebrew Theater. There are a few different performance troupes that use the stage here, and a lot of their performances are collaborations between the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians that all live either in the old city or in the vicinity of the old city. So it's a really neat way to get different groups of people talking to each other and getting together as opposed to staying apart. So we're just going to go to the other side of the building, and we're going to see what to me is really the highlight of the place. It's the Jaffa Bat Cave. So we can see the bats flying in the farthest archway of the building. And I was once here with a group, and even before I could say anything, they heard the squeaking of the bats. And one of the women got really excited and said, "Oh my God, it's the vampires." And, she was so excited to see the vampires that I couldn't very well ruin that for her. So I said, "Yes, this is the lair of the Jaffa vampires. So if you want, this is where the Jaffa vampires hang out as well." Now, that being said, these are fruit bats. And so they come out and feed right after the sun sets. So please take my advice and do not sit under a ficus tree when the sun is setting or right afterwards. That's where the bats hang out. And I once did that. And the weather forecast said nothing about rain. And I didn't understand why I was getting wet all of a sudden. Well, guess what? It wasn't rain. So please come to Tel Aviv and Jaffa and enjoy your time here. Enjoy the nightlife. Just don't sit under a ficus tree when the bats are out. Okay. Yeah, learn from my mistakes in that respect. Now, this building is used for storage mainly, where the bats are in the furthest section. The closer areas are used to store things that the city municipality doesn't really have anywhere to put them, like the green barricades that you use when there are races or concerts or all sorts of events. They do a lot of metal work, a lot of welding in this building, but it stays the same as a bat cave. So as fascinating as watching the bats are, I could probably stand here for a good few hours and just watch the bats fly around. But we have a lot more that we want to see here. So we are going to just head across the street, and we're going to see a lovely view of Tel Aviv. Ready, sit, here it is. So Tel Aviv is just about 110 years old. And it's really impressive to see what you can build in just over 100 years. Before Tel Aviv was established, it was nothing but sand dunes basically out here. So we're going to start with our viewpoint, And we will start with the furthest thing to our right, and that would be the minaret of the mosque. So this would be the minaret of the Mahmoudiya Mosque. The Mahmoudiya Mosque is the third largest mosque here in Israel. The first would be the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of course, in Jerusalem. The second would be the Al-Jazar Mosque in Akko, and this one, the Mahmoudiya Mosque of Jaffa, would be the third largest. Now, the minaret functions as it's where the call to prayer comes from. It's basically a public service that the mosque provides for all of the residents, reminding people, where'd my video go? Hey guys, it's time to pray. So this is a public service that the mosque provides, and Muslims pray 5 times a day. So you'll hear the call to prayer here 5 times a day. If you're in a Muslim area, it's fantastic. It's a service that the mosque is providing. If you're in a non-Muslim area and you have a mosque, it becomes a public nuisance or a public disturbance, especially with the 4:30 a.m. call to prayer. So mosques that are in predominantly non-Muslim areas, they function as usual. It's just their minaret is on silent, and Muslims that do live in that area will need to set an alarm clock in order to be able to wake up for that. Now, the people in the mosque are usually very friendly, very nice, and very open to welcoming people in, showing them around, and answering any questions that you might have, just not when they're about to pray, and if you're appropriately dressed. In the winter, it's not usually a problem. In the summer, it becomes a little bit more of an issue. So if you plan on going, and not just into a mosque, but into any holy site when you're traveling in Israel and around the world, just make sure that you have a shawl or something to cover your shoulders, and make sure you have your knees covered as well. So we are going to continue and veer a little bit to our left. And behind the palm tree, there is a small building called Bait al-Hayam, which I would love to circle, but I can't actually see it right now. And it is an event hall today. It was once a brothel, and it's been converted very nicely. Sorry, Avivit or Paul, are you guys seeing the video or not? Because I'm not seeing it. I see a gray screen.
Yes, let me try to fix it.
Because I can keep guiding, but it's easier to guide when I can see where I am.
Sorry, some technical problems, but we'll keep going in a few seconds. I think
In the
you're
meantime,
on, Rotem.
Yeah. So should I start over
Yeah.
from
Are you
here, or
seeing
should
it
we
again?
fast forward to where I was? I mean, I'm seeing the video, but I'm not seeing, right? We were at the minaret, and then we had just started panning to our next location.
Okay, I don't know where that was, so
So to go a few seconds back.
Forward, I think. Perfect, right here. That's exactly what I need. Okie dokie, now I need to annotate again. This building, this is the building I was talking about, Bait al-Hayam, and it was the brothel, and it is now an event hall. People get married on the roof. It's a beautiful place for a wedding. Now we can see here these lovely little red roofed buildings. This is Neve Tzedek, and it was the first Jewish neighborhood that was built outside of the walls of the old city of Jaffa, right? We said that there was the old city hall building. We saw it just a few minutes ago before we crossed the street, and that was decommissioned when all of the new neighborhoods began being built outside. So Neve Tzedek was the first. And as we pan along the coast, we see the skyscrapers of Tel Aviv. We can see all of the hotels along the coast. And behind the farthest hotel, we see a chimney stack. That would be the Reading power plant. And it was one of the first power plants that were built in the area. It was used mainly to power Tel Aviv. Today, it's a very small power plant. It provides just backup power in case of power outages. And it's also the area in which the Tel Aviv port is located. So it's about 5 kilometers north of us. The Tel Aviv port is a lovely area that has been completely converted into shops and restaurants. There's a little merry-go-round. There's also sort of all sorts of activities for kids during the weekends. So it's a fun place to check out. And right behind us, we can see these cannons. They were discovered in the archaeological excavations that took place on the wall of the old city that took place right beneath us. And they were situated back up here on the walls of the old city so that we could see what they looked like when they were actually on the walls of the old city. Now, Jaffa is really unique in that it has a double sort of defense system. Usually when you have a city that's surrounded by a wall, you've got your soldiers on your wall with their bows and arrows or later on their firearms in order to protect the city. But Jaffa is half surrounded by water, and a bow and arrow or even a gun back then weren't going to be so helpful against a sea invasion. And so you have cannons. Those will probably be a little bit more useful. So Jaffa has really two sorts of defenses. It's got the cannons on the side of the ocean and the soldiers with the bows and arrows or firearms a little bit later on the side with the land. Now we have another stop up here next to the viewpoint before we continue to our next location. And we have a picture frame. The city municipality has put up picture frames. One is here, another one is in the Charles Clore Park that we can see through the picture frame. So you can get really both sort of angles if you really want. And, you know, they even tell you what hashtags to use so you can post it on your social media. So if you would like, take a screenshot, if you know how, of your computer screen, and then you can just insert yourself into the photo and you have a lovely souvenir from our tour today. Now from here, we've got a little bit of a walk ahead of us, so get ready. We are heading to one of the, another religiously important building here, this time not in the Islam, but in Christianity. So here it is, the St. Peter's Church. Now, so this is something that I actually find really interesting here in the old city of Jaffa. It's that it's mentioned, the old city of Jaffa is mentioned in the Bible a few times. We'll talk about these stories a little bit later, but Jews don't really come here for its religious significance. However, Christians do, because usually when you have an important site in Christianity, it has to do with something that Jesus did or a place that Jesus was. So, of course, you have Nazareth and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But really, after all of these sites that have to do with Jesus, Jaffa is actually pretty important. And it all starts here in Capernaum, right above the Sea of Galilee. And this is where Jesus was preaching and he was teaching. And there was a man named Simon who was listening and began following in his footsteps. Simon was a fisherman. And one day Jesus tells him, "Hey, Simon, you're a pretty good fisherman. How about you help me fish for some people as opposed to fishing for fishies?" And so Simon begins to help Jesus gather followers. Now, one day, Jesus takes Simon and a few other disciples up to the Banyas right above Kiryat Shmona, right here in very northern tip of Israel. And he asks them, "Who am I?" And Simon says, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus tells him that because you have understood who I truly am, you will be the rock and the foundation of my church to come. And so Simon gets a new name. His name, right, in Latin, the word for rock is Petra. That's why in Jordan we've got the city that's named Petra after the red rock that's there. And Simon, also his name becomes Peter in English. And this is St. Peter. Now, on top of the church, we can see that there is a cross and it's sitting on a rock. And so, does the fact that my screen keeps going gray have anything to do with the fact that I'm drawing? It came back. That's good.
It might.
Okay. Okay. So I will stop doing that. Okay, so right, so the rock is there to have this connection with the story, with him being the rock and the foundation of the church to come. And so, what does the story have to do with Jaffa? Well, once Jesus is crucified and ascends to the heavens, Peter, no, I didn't draw this time. Oh, it came back again. Okay. Uh, so once Jesus ascends to the heavens, Peter really becomes the shepherd of Jesus's flock, and he's the one in charge of taking care of things. And so he begins to receive requests that Jesus received, such as coming to the city of Jaffa in order to revive a woman who has died. And Peter, one, he thanks the city of Jaffa for the invitation because he finds it very flattering that they think he can do these things. But then he tells them, listen, I don't know how to revive people. I'm not Jesus. And they say, yeah, we know, but Tabitha, she was really important. She was doing a lot of work for the community. She was working with the poor, the underprivileged, widows, and she was really a very important woman, and we can't replace her. And she's dead, so you can't really do any harm now, can you? So why don't you just come on over and, see if a miracle will happen? And so Peter does. He heads on over to the old city of Jaffa, right here where we are now, and they take him to Tabitha, and he sits and prays and tries to revive her. Now, it was the city of Jaffa's lucky day. We can see in the picture Peter with Tabitha trying to revive her, and he's able to revive Tabitha. And this is one of the reasons that this church is here, because Peter does this amazing miracle, not something that he's done before and not something that he does again, but he is able to revive Tabitha. Now, there's a second reason that this church is here, but we will talk about that a little bit later. Now we've got the Wishing Bridge. The Wishing Bridge is a very unique bridge because you can make a wish here and maybe it'll even come true. So you have to cross the bridge and look for your zodiac sign that's laid out on the left-hand side on the railing. From this direction, it's the left-hand side at least. Once you find your zodiac sign, you place your hand on it, you look out to the ocean and you make a wish, and then you finish crossing the bridge. Okay, that's all there is to it. So hope you made a wish, guys, if you're an Aquarius, because that was my sign. So we have now made our way to one of the ancient gates here in the old city of Jaffa. Upon closer inspection, you should all be able to tell me what gate, what time period this is from, because we're seeing ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so this was the gate from the time period of the ancient Egyptians, 3,500, maybe even 4,000 years ago. And the ancient Egyptians were really the first to conquer this area from the locals. Now, Jaffa was always a well-fortified city, and so the Egyptians, when they wanted to conquer, they knew that their come on in and conquer sort of method just wasn't going to work, and that they needed a slightly more creative way to do it. So what did they do? They filled up crates and vessels with all sorts of things like silks, linens, jewelry, gold, silver, and they came to Jaffa, sent a delegation, waving a white flag, saying, "We have a peace offering for you, O fair city." And the ruler of the city looks out, sees all of these lovely gifts, and welcomes the people into the city. The gates are opened, everyone is brought in, and the delegation is whisked away to a festive banquet. And while everyone is busy wining and dining, out of the crates come the rest of the Egyptian army, and they take the city by surprise. So we actually have the first Trojan horse story taking place right here in the city of Jaffa. Now, when the Egyptians conquer, they don't really leave very much of it behind. It's a loot, pillage, and destroy sort of mentality. And so they basically destroy the city. But then they look around and they say, huh, this is a good place to build a city. So why did they come to that conclusion? Well, first of all, we already saw the view from up here. You can see a good distance. So it's an elevated area. And whenever you're in an elevated area, especially 4,000 years ago, you're the one who can control everything that's going on around you. The Egyptians arrived to Jaffa on a very important trade route back then, the Via Maris. It was the route that connected between Jaffa and Mesopotamia. Right outside of the old city, there's a lot of fertile agricultural lands. And so they weren't going to have any problems growing enough food for everyone. And these agricultural lands will be important at our next stop as well. And if you begin to dig, you don't have to dig too far before you reach the groundwater aquifer. So you've got your water, you've got your food, you've got transportation, and you've got protection. And these are really the four important features that you need of a land in order to build a city back in the ancient times. And Jaffa scores A+ on all four of them. So the ancient Egyptians, they build on top of the city they just destroyed. And the next conquerors come in and destroy, and then they build right on top of that because they decide, there was something to this piece of land. And then the next invaders come, destroy, and build on top, and they continue so on and so forth. And that's why the ancient Egyptian gate, if you can see, it's below us, and we're standing on a higher level because the ground level 4,000 years ago was lower than the ground level that we have up here today. So we are just going to start our stroll in through the old alleyways of the city. Now, the alleys here are full of galleries, shops, restaurants, bars. It's a lovely place to come and get lost on your own. And we are going to continue to a very unique piece of art that we have here in the old city. We can see people taking pictures next to it. You can get a little more creative with it when you're here and take pictures under it as well. This would be a sculpture put in place by Ran Morin, an Israeli artist, in 1993, and it is a floating tree. Now, we said that the agricultural lands out here were going to be important at our next stop. This is our next stop, and this is where they're important because this is an orange tree. And this was the main industry back here in Jaffa. And not only did they grow the oranges right outside of the city, they were also exported through the Jaffa Port. So the oranges got their brand name, the Jaffa Orange, because that was the local brand here. Now, today, the Jaffa Orange is actually a brand that's been sold and franchised. So you can get your Jaffa Orange made in China, it can be made in Spain and Florida, in any place that has the weather to grow an orange, that has paid enough money to use the tag Jaffa Orange. You can still get a Jaffa Orange that's grown here in Israel, but not here in the Jaffa area. Here in the Jaffa area, we mainly grow buildings today instead of agriculture. But in the north and the south, we still do quite a lot of agriculture, and we do still grow quite a lot of citrus fruits here in Israel. Now, when the British took over this area in 1917, they were really excited to be coming to a land flowing with vitamin C because they were having some serious issues with their sailors. Their sailors were going out to sea and they would come home missing teeth. And it wasn't because they were fighting pirates. It was because they were getting scurvy from a lack of vitamin C and their teeth were falling out. And so when the British conquered the area, they basically inherited an insane amount of vitamin C that they could now bring to all of their sailors. And thus they solved their scurvy problem. And since this time, the British sailors would come home with the same amount of teeth they started with. So this was definitely good news for the British sailors back then. Now the tree is still growing and flourishing tree. We can see the drip irrigation system. It's connected to the fertilization system here. So it is a live growing tree, and it even produces oranges every year. So if you're the first to get to see the orange, you can even pick it and enjoy the fruits of the tree. And that's really what the artist was trying to say, that the Jaffa Orange brand is still growing and flourishing like the tree here, but it's floating. It's not rooted in the ground. It's not created in Jaffa anymore. So we are continuing through the alleyways of the old city to our first Bible story here. So until we get there, try to think of what biblical stories you know that involve the city of Jaffa, and we'll see if we're on the same page. Okay, if you weren't thinking of a story that involves a whale, this would be your first clue. So this is a lovely whale sculpture. It is sometimes a fountain as well, but today it's not. And this would be Ilana Gore, the Israeli artist and sculptor who created the whale. Her home and museum are here in the old city of Jaffa. And so they are open for a visit. And even on the balconies, you can see a lot of her artwork and a lot of her sculptures that are out on display. So you don't actually have to go into the museum to enjoy her works. But we're heading back to our biblical story that involves Jaffa and a whale. And hopefully, you guys all know which story I'm talking about now. It's the story of Jonah and the whale. But you're not going to be getting your classical biblical version. You're going to be getting the Rotem version of events. And so here we go. A long, long time ago in a city right here lived a man named Jonah. He was your average sort of guy until God talks to him. And God says, "Hey, Jonah, I need you to do me a favor." So Jonah says, "Of course, God, whatever you need." And so God tells him, "Well, you see, there are these people in the city of Nineveh. I really don't like the way they're behaving. They're just doing everything upside down and backwards. And I'm really just so angry that I want to destroy them all if they don't change their ways. Can you go tell them that for me?" And Jonah, not wanting to argue with God, says, "Of course, God, whatever you say." And he packs a bag and heads in the opposite direction. He heads down to the Jaffa Port and gets on a boat to he really doesn't care where, as long as it's going far, far away from Nineveh. Because as much as he doesn't want to displease God, he is terrified of the people of Nineveh, and he completely understands why God wants to destroy them. And he's all for that. So he's going in the opposite direction, hoping that God just won't notice. Well, guess what? God notices. And all of a sudden, there's a storm. And the sailors, they had checked the weather forecast. AccuWeather said nothing about a storm. And so they begin to ask the people on board what's going on, because it must be someone's fault. And when they find Jonah, he confesses and he says, "Listen, guys, I'm sorry. This has to be my fault, because you see, God, he asked me to do something, and I really don't want to do it because I'm terrified of the people of Nineveh. I can't go there. I don't want to see them. I'd rather be anywhere else. So I got on this boat hoping to be anywhere else, but now God's found me and I don't know what to do. And we're all going to die if I stay on board this ship." And so they throw him overboard. But luckily for Jonah, he doesn't drown. He gets eaten by that large fish that we see in the picture. And biblically speaking, it says large fish. We interpret that as whale, and that's why we've got the whale sculpture here. And so he gets swallowed up by the fish. And it's still Jonah's lucky day, because one, he didn't drown, and two, he didn't die by being eaten. And he just hangs out in the whale until he figures out what he was supposed to do, where things went wrong, and how he can fix it. And he finally has the epiphany that maybe he just needs to do what God asked him to do in the first place. And once he has this realization, bloop, out comes the whale. Jonah's back on shore, and off he goes to Nineveh. And he heads to Nineveh and tells the people what has just happened to him. And luckily for Jonah and for the people of Nineveh, they listen to Jonah, they believe his story, and they change their ways and live happily ever after. Yay. I grew up on Disney stories. Things just have to end happily ever after. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And our next stop would be the Ori Geller Museum. Right outside his museum, this would be Ori Geller, and his claim to fame is bending spoons. That's why we have a huge museum, a huge spoon sculpture right outside of his museum. And he said it was commissioned, he had it commissioned through an artist, because he said that creating the biggest bent spoon was too much for his powers to handle, and he would not be able to bend it himself. So he needed someone else to bend it for him. And he really does bend spoons. I've seen him do it. I actually met him at a restaurant here in Jaffa a few years ago. And I asked him what he and his friends were eating, because it looked amazing. It was some sort of dessert platter. And they were really nice. And they actually invited me to join them for dessert, which was pretty cool. And then he asks me if I want him to bend a spoon for me. And I said, sure, why not? And so he asked the waitress for a spoon. She brings him a spoon. He holds it like this. He stares at it and wiggles it up and down. And then it turns into what you're seeing on your screen right now. So he signed it and gave it to me. And that was pretty neat. Now, underneath the spoon, Ori Geller has placed his handprints. So we can actually hold hands with Ori Geller. Same as the wishing bridge, you put your hands on, you can make a wish, you can say a prayer, or you can read what Ori Geller has written in Hebrew, Arabic, and in English. So in English, it says, hold my hands, be positive, be optimistic, and stay hopeful. I wish you health, happiness, peace of mind, and positive energy. So congratulations, guys. We have now all been blessed by Uri Geller. And in his museum, there are, he's collected a lot of things over the course of his performances and everything that he's done. So he's received a lot of neat gifts. He's made a lot of cool purchases. And so the museum's supposed to showcase all of these really neat objects that he's got. But the museum hasn't opened yet because it was supposed to open in April or in May. So we're waiting on a new date. Now we have a very important person that we have to go meet. And in a moment, we'll even get there. Okay, hopefully you guys recognize him. This is Napoleon. So the year is 1799, and Napoleon wants to take control of the world. And he decides to start with the Ottoman Empire because they're not doing so well during this time period. And he feels that this would be a really the easiest place to start and, get going. So he turns to the Ottomans and says, hey guys, I have a proposition for you. So the Ottomans say, okay, we're listening. And Napoleon says, how about we sign a treaty? And the Ottomans say, okay, yeah, we're listening. What's the treaty about? And Napoleon reads to them, we, the Ottoman Empire, hereby sign over our lands to Napoleon. And the Ottomans don't understand how this is useful to them. So Napoleon explains, well, if you sign, I don't have to invade by force. And the Ottomans don't really like this treaty, so they sign with the British instead. And as we know, the French and the British are not always the best of friends. And so Napoleon has to come in and conquer by force. So he comes in through Egypt, and then he continues up along the coast and makes his way to Jaffa, right here where we're standing. He conquers the city, leaving dead and wounded on both sides. His wounded stay put, and he continues to the north. He makes it to the old city of Akko, and he's got some misinformation, shall we say, about the defenses of the city. And it takes him 8 tries before he's able to break through the defenses. And at this point in time, he just says, screw this, I'm going home. And he comes back in through Jaffa, picks up his wounded, at least those that could take themselves, and they continue back through Egypt and back home. And so in 1799, Napoleon was here. Today, what we have are sculptures of Napoleon. This isn't the only one. We've got a few of them throughout the old city, and they all point in the direction of historical sites. Our next stop will be another story about another person named Simon, which will connect us back to St. Peter's Church. Remember, we said that there are 2 reasons for the church. One was because Peter was able to revive Tabitha, and that we would talk about the second story later. Well, it's later, so we are making our way to our second Simon story, and this time we are here at the house of Simon the Tanner. So let's start off with the tanner part of things. A tanner is a person who makes leather. This means that in his home and in his workshop, he has a lot of dead animal hides that he needs to treat with whatever it is they treat animal hides with to turn them into leather that humans were using 2,000 years ago and today. And so this is a pretty stinky, smelly sort of business, and that's why it's on the outskirts of the city. Now, when Peter is here, he decides after he revives Tabitha, right? We said that he was from the Sea of Galilee area. It's I don't know, maybe like a 3-hour drive. And back then there were no cars. It would take him a few days to get back home. So he decides to stay the night at least before he gets going. And so he stays here with Simon the Tanner. Now, when he is here, he has a vision. And in this vision, he sees a large white sheet with all sorts of unkosher animals coming down from the sky, and a voice from the heavens commanding him to eat. At this point in time, the main difference really between Peter and Jesus' disciples and the rest of the Jewish population would be that they believe in Jesus. Other than that, Christianity doesn't really exist yet, and the belief in Jesus is a sort of subset within Judaism. And so the fact that a voice from the sky is commanding him to eat all these unkosher animals doesn't make too much sense to him. And as any good Jew would, he begins to argue with a voice from the sky. And so he argues. The second time the voice from the sky commands him to eat, he continues to argue. And the third time, the voice from the sky gets a little angry and says, "Who are you to taint what I have purified?" When Peter wakes up, he realizes that this was a metaphor, that these unkosher animals represent the rest of the world, the Roman Empire. They're all pagans. They're worshiping as many gods as possible. And whereas the Jews, might not believe in Jesus, but believe in one God. So that's definitely better than the Romans at this point in time. And he realizes that maybe now is the point at which you stop trying to convince Jews to believe in Jesus and have to spread it to the rest of the world, convince the rest of the world to believe in Jesus. And so this is really the vision that sets the belief in Jesus on the course to becoming Christianity of today. And that happens right here in the old city of Jaffa. Now, this vision is also taken literally. Who are you to taint what I've purified in regards to to all these unkosher animals? So if you believe in Jesus, you don't have to keep kosher. And later, St. Paul will do away with the rest of the rules and regulations of Judaism, and that's really the separating point. But this vision here in the old city of Jaffa is what gets the path started. So this is pretty important in Christianity. Now, our next stop would be the port of Jaffa. And the Jaffa Port is our last stop on the tour, but don't worry, I've still got a few more stories to tell you there. And as we make our way down, I just want to do a brief recap of everything we have seen and talked about, because we've done quite a lot since the beginning. So we started off at the clock tower, and we saw the tower itself. We saw the new City Hall building, and we saw the Setai Hotel, which was also the police station and a jail. We then teleported to the old City Hall building, and we saw the Jaffa Museum, the Hebrew Arab Theater, and the Jaffa Bat Cave / vampire lair. And we got to see the vampire bats, or the fruit bats. We crossed the street for a lovely view. We saw some cannons. We saw a picture frame. And then we continued to the St. Peter's Church. From the church, we made a wish at the wishing bridge. And then we saw an ancient Egyptian gate. We saw a hanging tree. We saw a whale, a spoon, and the house of Simon the Tanner. And we are continuing our way down into the port. So welcome to the Jaffa Port, everybody. It is one of the oldest ports in the world. It's mentioned in the Bible a few times. We already talked about the story of Jonah and the whale. The cedars of Lebanon make their way here to the Jaffa Port to build King Solomon's temple. But the story that I want to share with you now is actually a story from the Greek mythology. It's the story of Andromeda. And the story actually starts off here in the ocean with the sea gods. And the sea gods are very upset because they have daughters, and their daughters don't seem to be the best at anything. And this is completely unacceptable if you are children of the gods. You have to be the best at something. So they're really struggling to figure out what, because they weren't very good at school. So they weren't good at reading, not at writing, not at spelling, and not at swimming for that matter. But they were very beautiful. And so the sea gods decide that their daughters must be the most beautiful of them all. So they hold a beauty pageant in order to prove this to themselves and to the rest of the world. But things don't go quite as they expected during this beauty pageant, because their daughters do not win. So who does? The beautiful Queen of Jaffa, Cassiopeia. Now she's running into a problem now, because she won at this beauty pageant that the daughters of the sea gods were supposed to win at. And this just angered the sea gods so much that they've sent a storm and a large monster to wreak havoc and destroy the city. And this is a problem for her. So she decides to head to the oracle in Delphi to find a solution. And the oracle says you have two options. Number one is you can let the monster and the storm destroy your city. And Cassiopeia says, thanks, no thanks. I came to you for an alternative to that. And so the oracle says, gladly, sacrifice your daughter Andromeda to the sea gods. Now, Cassiopeia doesn't like option number two any more than she liked option number one. So on her way home, she tries to come up with an option number three. Unfortunately, she's made it home without being able to come up with anything else. So, with a heavy heart, she takes her daughter and chains her to the port and waits for the sea monster to come for her. But it's Andromeda's lucky day because above the sea monster, you can see someone, and his name is Perseus. He has just killed Medusa, and he is coming home with Medusa's head. So, what happens when you look into the eyes of Medusa? You turn to stone. So we said it's Andromeda's lucky day because this is not what happens to Andromeda. It's what happens to the sea monster. So Perseus kills the sea monster by turning it to stone. He saves Andromeda and they live happily ever after. Now, this is a story that we can prove because if you look out into the ocean right behind the boat, you can see that there's a lot of little smaller and larger rocks. Those are the remains of the sea monster. Now, whether it's a sea monster or a part of the sandstone ridge that we have here, that's up for you to decide. But either way, it's a big problem because these are large rocks at the entrance to the port. Not only that, the Jaffa Port is shallow. And so when things, one, there was, the same way we say go to hell. They used to say, the seafarers, they would say go to Jaffa because it was so difficult to navigate this area. And two, especially with the steam engine, everything got bigger, everything got deeper, and the Jaffa port is shallow with rocks. The boats would dock or they would anchor outside of the port, and the smaller vessels of the fishermen, they would go out to the larger boats, and then they would bring in all of the merchandise or the people trying to make their way to shore. Now, the Jaffa port is a very popular place to go here in Israel, especially on the weekends. It is full of people. There are all sorts of shops, restaurants, art galleries here. During the weekends, there are also a lot of times there are different musical concerts or dance performances. The place is really utilized to the fullest. And so there was also not a lack of people here when I filmed here in the Jaffa port. And there is one more place that I would like to show you before we finish our tour, and that would be the Nalagat Center. Nalagat literally means please touch. And that's a sort of hint as to what the function of the building is. It's actually a stage for the deaf, the blind, and the mute. And so they really work on three sort of levels. The first one is that this place can be rented out as a sort of event or conference hall. So if you have a sort of a conference that you're hosting or want to do a big event, you can rent this place out. And then your staff here is of the deaf, blind, and or mute population. And this is an amazing employment opportunity for them because it's generally a subsect of the population that is that's overlooked because they do completely integrate into society visually speaking. You can't really tell if someone has one of these impairments without trying to communicate with them or seeing them communicate with someone else. And so you tend to forget that they exist. And in today's modern day and age, especially with computers and technology and voice activation, there's a lot of things that people who can't see, hear, or speak cannot do. And so this is one of the ways that we're trying to solve that. The second thing that they have here is a theater where the deaf, blind, and mute are all actors in the play. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard quite amazing reviews about it. So I'm looking forward to getting to do that in the near future. And the third thing that they have is called the Blackout Cafe. This is a restaurant where you can have dinner in complete and utter darkness. And it's supposed to sort of simulate what it's like going blind and not being able to see what you're doing for the first time. And so for me, I had dinner here once with a few friends, and it was a really profound sort of experience. The first thing you do is one, you have to check anything that makes light into a locker before you can actually head into the restaurant. So any cell phones get checked into a locker. So do if anyone still has a watch with a backlight, that goes into a locker. If you've got those cool shoes that have lights at the bottom that light up when you walk, you have to go in barefoot. You can't take those shoes in. And then you go in, and your waiter tells you that you've got, your general dinner set up on the table, and good luck. And for me, it was a really profound experience trying to navigate my dinner without being able to see what I was doing. Have you guys ever tried closing your eyes and using a fork? Like it was very hard. Um, so it was a really interesting experience to go through. And I know that there are restaurants like this in different cities around the world. Here in Israel, in a nearby city in Holon, there is what is called in a museum. It's the Dialogue in the Dark. And that's a complete museum exhibit that takes you from room to room. They're all completely dark, and you get to navigate different scenarios of daily life. So you have a bedroom, you have an outdoor street, you have the beach, you have all sorts of different scenarios that, things that we do on a daily basis that all of a sudden you can't see what you're doing. And there's also an exhibit called Invitation to Silence, where you can see what you're doing, but you can't hear, and you have to go through the entire exhibit. It's about communicating when you can't hear what's going on. And so these are just a few options for what you can do when you make it to Israel. And so thank you very much for coming on this virtual tour of Jaffa with me through the JCCs here. And now we'll open it up to questions if there are any. I don't see anything in the Q&A section.
Rotem, we'd like first of all to thank you so much for this wonderful tour. It really made me feel, at least, and especially as an Israeli, that I wanted to be there and be part of this tour. It was so rich and so informative, and I loved it. And I'm sure all our audience loved it too. For everyone, if you have any questions, we have the Q&A that you can actually press and ask Rotem a question, or in the chat, and Rotem would love to answer you any questions you have about this tour. But again, Rotem, thank you so much from our hand. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Yay. Yay. Well, I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. And there's no such thing as a stupid question. Okay. So really, because if you're thinking, oh, well, I wonder, ... someone else is probably also thinking the same thing. So please ask. And if you don't have a question, we've got a question for you. Where would you like our next tour to be? Right, you should see a pop-up on your screen. I see it on mine, though it's telling me I'm not allowed to vote. But your options are Jerusalem, Masada, or Caesarea. So vote now, because you guys are choosing where our next tour will be. I'm going to try voting anyway. No, it won't let me. Okay.
It won't let me too, but maybe because we're the panelists, right, Paul?
I know. That's what it said. It said that panelists and hosts can't vote, but I thought I would give it a try.
So we cannot vote. we can only see the votes. Okay, so I guess we don't have any questions, Rotem. I think people loved it so much that it was really like to walk with you in Israel. And for me, Jaffa is such a beautiful place, but to learn about the history and what it means to us as Jewish people, that's wonderful. And we loved it. You have a question, actually.
I have a question if we'll be having more virtual tours like this. So yeah, that's what the poll was about, to choose our next touring location. So if you have an opinion as to where you want to go, add the 3 options.
And maybe you can choose and maybe we can just remind them the day that we're going to have the next tour. We don't know yet where because we have to wait for the vote.
Oh, yeah. Right, but I don't remember the date. I know we planned it, and it's in 2 weeks. And I remember we talked about the fact that I was supposed to tell them when it was going to be. On the 2nd.
That's
the 2nd,
true,
July 2nd.
July 2nd. And we will try to have it at 5 p.m. if you guys have any questions about it. And if you'd like